Welcome to the REI Foundation Podcast, where we cover all the steps and strategies to make your real estate dreams a reality. Now your hosts, Jason and Peely.
Hi, everybody, and welcome to the REI Foundation Podcast with Jason and Peely. Today, we welcome Lane Kawaoka. Welcome, Lane.
Hey, guys. How's it going?
Thank you so much for coming on.
Great to meet you. I had the pleasure of talking with Lane a little bit a couple days ago. So we look forward to chatting here and learning a little bit more about what you're into.
Yes. So, Lane, how did you get started in real estate?
So I graduated college about 10 years ago, and as an engineer, I went to work. And at that time, I was just following that linear path of go get a job, go to college, get a job, save your money, and then buy a primary residence. So that's what I went out and did. A few years into that job, I saved enough money for that down payment, 20% down to go and live in. And then since I was traveling all the time for work, leaving home on Sunday and coming back on Saturday or Friday, I was only there for a day, so it didn't really make much sense. So I started renting it out. So in a way, I became an accidental landlord, and nice. I was like, wow, like this is pretty cool, right? Like that's a lot of beer money. I did everything wrong, right? I bought this A-class rental, and it just wasn't really good for multiple roommates. It was just more for a family, which at the time in Seattle was a good place to have a rental. A lot of increase in the market, but it was about $350,000, and it rented for $2,200. So not even anywhere close to the 1% rule.
Yeah. For the listeners out there who need help with their math, could you do the math for us? Why that doesn't work?
So when you take the mortgage on that one was about $1,600. So for the lay person out there, they'll say, "Oh, the mortgage is being covered by the amount of rent coming in because the rent is $2,200, and then you minus $1,600." So you think $2,200 minus $1,600. That's I'm not very good at math. It's $600 of profit there, right there, right? And at the time, I was like, well, yeah, that's like beer money for me. I mean, I was going to Las Vegas, and I was thinking to myself, well, every month I got $600 rolling in. But then I realized that even with it being a totally brand new modern home, there would be repairs, and it just seemed like 10% go to that. I had a property manager, 10% goes to that. And luckily I never had any CapEx because that was a pretty much brand new property. But you've got to account for that too, another 10%. So at the very least, you're looking at 30% off. So what is that? 70% that you're going to take home. Mm-hmm. And that's on a brand new property. And then that's where I learned about the 50% rule from just devouring all the podcasts and books out there. And but then I was still hooked. At the time, I had bought that property in 2009 and renting it out 2010, 11. It still cash flowed in Seattle. And then, I quickly, then at that point, I was like, wow, like I just need to like pile all my money into this stuff. Like, what can I sell? Like everything that like went on eBay, all the stuff I was spending my money on that was frivolous as like a early 20-year-old. Like I just, poured it right into down payment money for the next project. And I always tell people like, that's why you should start getting your first rental. Just even though like the turnkey rentals, they're not cash flowing as much today. Just get it because you'll see like how this mousetrap works, and it'll just totally change your personal finance outlook and your spending habits, because you'll see how you put money into this as down payments, and you'll see how it just flows out like ATM machines.
Yeah, it's amazing because it's one thing to read and to see other people doing it, but when it's your property you really have your hands getting dirty with it, you understand how the numbers really working. Because on the outside, $1,600 for a mortgage, $2,200 for rent, you're rolling it. But when you take in the point that you're going to have vacancy down, you're going to have CapEx that you're going to account for how long you put it, you're exactly right. You're going to get hit down the road. So with this Class A property, it seems like it's worked out well for you, and that's great.
Yeah, and I see, you can look at it two ways. You can look at it on paper and be counting like 8% cash flow or 6.7% cash flow. which as you can tell, a lot of engineers like to come and talk to me, and this is the way they analyze it. But at the end of the day, it's when you actually get the property and you have it in operation, like it's like a couple $100 coming back at you, or 100, and that's like real tangible money. That's like 4 or 5 dinners a month or something like that, something tangible, and it comes alive when that happens.
Yeah, it's great.
Nice. So how did you learn, and who helped you to take those first steps into like really getting into real estate?
So I think at that time I didn't read Rich Dad, Poor Dad until much later. But I read The Millionaire Investor by Keller.
Gary Keller, Jay Papasan.
Yes. Yeah. So it had a lot of good images. I learned the nuances between A, B, and C class. And I was like, well, shoot, I got that A class, right? Like, that's not what sophisticated investors buy. They kind of stay in that B- sweet spot. And you want to stay away from the D class or C class war zone properties.
Mm-hmm.
So that book was like probably the best book I've read, and that's probably the only book that you really need to read to kind of get going. I always follow things by like the 70-20-10 rule.
Mm-hmm.
So like in corporate America, they always say like 10% is with academics, like what you learn in books, or they do little dinky leadership seminars once in a while. And then 20% is what you learn from your peers. So like, us talking together, or, going to a local RIA, or even like the forums on there. But 70% is actually doing it. And people like think the 10 and the 20% is a huge part, but it's the minority. It's that 70% of just buying something and just seeing how it goes.
Yeah, I love that. And one thing that we always like to ask is that it's so tough to actually take that step to the 70% and actually doing it. So you can talk about it all you want, you can read about it all you want, but there's so many people that are stuck and they just can't do that first deal. What was it that would really allowed you? Because you have your accidental rental, and you say, okay, this is great, but what really allowed it in your mindset to say, okay, this is the direction I'm going to take? Was it that you were just seeing other people's success, or were you just saying, okay, this worked out, and you kind of were a little more risk adverse, or what do you feel allowed you to get over the hurdle?
I just had the money rolling in and just saw the cash flow. I mean, at that scale, it was probably about $400 of cash flow coming in every month.
It's awesome.
And that allowed me, sometimes, since I didn't have a home for a few years there, which was part of the reason why I was able to save so much money, I would like go to Las Vegas for the weekend, instead of flying home on corporate travel to Seattle, I'd just stay in Las Vegas or something like that. And
Nice.
And having that extra few $100s just to go and pretty much blow, because essentially it's as cash flow, it's sort of like an abundance mindset. Like it just comes in every month, it regenerates. So you're kind of like, whoa, whatever, like just go and blow it, right? But in actuality, I put it into more down payment money, because I didn't want only $400. I wanted $1,000 a month. So it took me a little bit to save up for the next property, which again was in Seattle, but it was more of a B+ rental. So I went a little down on that spectrum to try and get more to that sweet spot. And I thought a B+ rental would be, a little less headaches, but still a little bit better margins. So it was a duplex. And so bought that property in 2000, a few years later. And at that time in 2011, 12, the market was starting to go up in Seattle, much like the rest of the country. And I wasn't hitting my rent to value ratio numbers. This stuff wasn't cash flowing. And I was like, what the heck, right? Like,
Okay.
what do I do, right? But that's what people on the West Coast and Seattle, Hawaii, East Coast, that's just life, right? I mean,
Yeah.
whether it's...
So what did you do to, I guess, solve that?
So at that point, I was just trying everything. I was like researching into flipping and wholesaling and stuff like that. And that wasn't really my thing. I mean, I always try and I preach to like the working professionals like myself, like we don't have time to screw around with this other stuff. Like for some of us, I mean, I'm an engineer. I don't really make too much money, but some of these other guys out there, they're making like $120,000, $200,000 a year. And it's like, they shouldn't be screwing around flipping houses or doing this other stuff. Their highest and best use is at their job. And I didn't really want to learn a new flipping industry and do all that and do my time with that because I was barely home to begin with. So I looked into these turnkey rentals out of state. It's all the same ones: Birmingham, Memphis, Atlanta, Indianapolis, Kansas City, Jacksonville. There at that time, you're picking up properties for like 1% in good B areas. Now it's a little different as a seller's market. You're probably picking up $100,000 properties in C plus areas, but you're getting cash flow. And I always ask, like, what's my goal? My goal is to build passive streams of income so I can leave my job. And the flipping stuff wasn't aligned with that goal. And people say that, yeah, you go to all these like places like Birmingham and you're not going to get the appreciation you get in Seattle. I'm like, well, I don't care. Like, that's my goal is for cash flow. It's not for big boosts of appreciation, which I kind of saw as gambling, and I kind of freaked myself out. So I wanted to cash out of my appreciation properties in Seattle. So that's what I did a few years ago when I sold all my Seattle properties. And I did one 1031 exchange where I exchanged 2 for 9 properties out of state. So that got a little crazy. Yeah, that was not a good time.
So I'll talk a little bit more about that. I mean, we like to hear about the
hurdles,
hurdles and the success. So tell us a little bit more about that hurdle.
Yeah. So I bought that first property and it appreciated probably about 80 grand at least. And I had, at one time, I actually paid down the mortgage because I'm an idiot. And you hear so much financial advice about paying down your mortgage. So I actually did that at one time. So I had a bunch of equity in there. And I always tell people, like, look how much equity you have in your property. Don't calculate your return on investment or all this other metrics. It's return on equity once you're in operation. Like, the cash on cash return is evaluating a new acquisition just to compare apples to apples. But once you're in operations, you figure out how much deployable equity in there and what's the highest and best use, just like you figure out what's your highest best use for your time. So in these properties, I had like $150,000 of equity, and it was only making like a few $100s of cash flow. So you're talking like low single digits. And at that point, you're probably better off in a bond or something like that with the amount of risk and headaches, even as a passive turn or rental property. So I was like, well, okay, what can I do? What's my alternate scenario just to analyze the numbers as a second scenario? I'm like, well, I could take this money and go buy $100,000 properties at 30 grand a pop, right? Mm-hmm. So that's like 150 divided by 30, that's 5 properties. I'm like, okay, cool. Like, now what will this do for me, right? So each property will be $200 a cash flow conservative. So 5 times 200, that's $1,000 of cash flow, right? Like,
you hit your mark.
1,000,
yep.
Yeah, 1,000 is greater than 400, right? Like, yep. Duh. So I'm like, okay, now we got to go and do it, right? So yeah, just started to research like the 1031 and figure out who are the custodians to do that, and just start learning up and just do it. And then the hard thing is lining up all your properties for that 1031, because you've got 100 days to do it. But the real constraint is this 45-day rule. So you've got to identify, once you sell your subject property, 45 days go by, and on that 45th day, you have this homework assignment where you have to write down every single property that you can possibly close on. And you can't write like an infinite amount of properties. There's these rules, like it can only be 200% of the sale of the subject property. So, at $100,000 a pop property, I mean, I think I could only write like 8 to 10 properties. Wow. So that, like, it really sucks, because now if you don't close on that property or something comes up in due diligence, well, you either got to pay the tax man or just got to close it. And everybody knows that you're working with 1031 money. So they've got you. You're screwed, yeah. Right? I don't recommend 1031s. I mean,
quick thing, could you just give us a little, give the listeners a little bit about 1031? Just quick overview. What is a 1031?
Yeah. So the reason you do a 1031 is, like, I had all this appreciation equity. So like 150 grand. And I would have, if I sold the property, I don't get that homestead exemption, which you do with your primary residence. So I would have to pay $150,000. So if I made 100 grand of income at my day job and I just sold it, now I'd be making $250,000 of income, and I have to pay the taxes on that, which is like, nobody really wants to do that, right?
No.
Nope.
So that what the 1031 allows you to do is take that $150,000 of gain and just roll it into the next one. And in theory, you keep doing this until you die. And then when you die, whoever you pass it on to, that all gets washed away. That's in a simple term. So it's a way of delaying the gains. But
Perfect.
As you can see, like with these 1031s, they're about $500,000 to execute one of these transactions as fees. And you always have to sell and then buy. And right now in a seller's market, there's no deals. So you can get your price, but what are you going to roll into? You're just going to get a lukewarm deal, if anything, and everybody knows you have a 1031. So the seller on the next property knows you're motivated to buy.
Mm-hmm.
So in theory, it makes sense. But a lot of people that I'm working with these days, they just say sell it and put it into something more scalable, or like a multifamily syndication, or just eat the taxes and find the better deal. But I think it's a paradigm shift. Like if you're an active, experienced investor and you can find good deals, then don't mess with the 1031. But if you're a lazy person who doesn't know what they're doing, then the 1031 might be the best thing for you.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, that's great. That's great.
It's a great explanation. I think that's the first time I've ever heard somebody say, don't do it.
Right.
Yeah,
Don't do it. Don't do it. You guys should not do it.
I've been on the opposite side. We've known that people need to sell. They're looking at 1031. And so we knew it really put us in a power position as a buyer. I completely understand it. They're under a timeline. So for us, we were able to crunch it based on pushing more to our advantage, because if they want to hit this, or they're stuck getting hit with the tax man. So yeah, great explanation. Thank you for putting that together.
Yeah, I actually had on my last property, the guy basically extorted me for like $5 extra because there was like a swimming pool in there, and I had to fill in the swimming pool because for Fannie Mae, you can't have a non-working swimming pool on property. So, and they knew I had a 1031, and they said, well, we're not closing it. I'm like, what the heck, man? Like,
oh no. So they got you for another 5?
Yeah, they said, oh, we're going to increase the price by whatever. And I'm like,
geez. So tell us a little bit more about turnkey rentals. You went into that a little bit.
Yeah. So, I mean, there's on these websites online that you can find, you kind of find the turnkey providers. There's 3 ways of buying a turnkey rental. You can go straight to the provider. The pros on that is you get the best price. The cons are you're kind of you're not working with a real estate agent. They don't have fiduciary responsibility to you, and they're sophisticated and savvy, and you're not. If you're buying a turnkey rental,
especially if it's your first time.
Right. So there's dangers there. The other end of the spectrum is buying it through a marketer. So these are the guys with the podcasts. They bring people in, and then they kind of go out to the different providers. The cons on that is they're throwing on extra fees, and a lot of times they're just marking it up to that 1% rent to value rule.
Got it.
Especially for like the lower end like properties, like the $60,000-$70,000 properties. I wouldn't touch that stuff today. That's all war zone today.
So if I'm here in New Jersey and I say that I'm interested in turnkey rentals, and now with your experience of going through this whole point, if I was looking at a market into, say, Indianapolis, Jacksonville, or whatever, what would be some points that you could give me to help me lead me in the right direction to, 1, choosing a market, and 2, choosing the right operator?
So I would first figure market. I mentioned like some of the top half dozen. I think I'm more of a guy who's, as long as you're sticking to those markets, it's more about the people that you work with as opposed to the market.
what stood out to you with those markets? What was like the thing that, like, besides just the operators there, what was like, what made you feel comfortable with those markets?
So they're secondary markets. They're not the Seattle, Dallas. They're not the huge markets. They have, as secondary markets, they're large city centers, the major cities. The second criteria is robust economies. So that takes away like Detroit, right? Detroit's a secondary market, but they don't have a robust economy. It's just a one-trick pony there. So like a Kansas City, it's like it's not the coolest city. I'm going to go visit there other than to get like a cheap UFC ticket there. But like, it's a very strong economic market. It's a lot of different companies, a lot of white collar, a lot of blue collar. And those are the two big criteria. And then with those criteria, I mean, you're only down to like a dozen cities out there. And so what I'm saying is like, as long as you stick to those two criteria and you get the filter down to those dozen, I mean, you really can't go wrong. I mean, you're basically throwing a dart on the wall. It's mostly now just vetting the people that you're working with.
And what did you do to vet the operator there? What was some points that some actual steps people can take when they do have a couple of turnkey operations and are trying to choose between one?
So I would not go on like the internet sites because you'll just get swarmed by the sharks, the vendors. You got to go one more layer deep and just talk to the investors and who has bought from who, which is sort of hard to find because a lot of these turnkey buyers, they're really passive. And they're not trolling the forums. They don't really care. They're living their life. They're passive. So it's hard to find a lot of these people. But once you find one, maybe you can find another just by, who else can I talk to? And you start navigating the web. I've got on my website, and if you contact me, I've got like a little secret Facebook group that I created that has a lot of these turnkey buyers, but I try and filter people pretty well.
Awesome.
No vendors. Yeah.
Hey, did you hear that? Facebook. Get on Facebook. Get on the Facebook super secret
super
page.
secret pages and groups.
if you want to find the people to go to for turnkey. Awesome.
Yeah. If you're one of those guys who doesn't want to get on Facebook, well, that's one less tool you have. Yeah.
About 3 of you left, I think.
Yeah. Yeah, you got to join them.
Yeah. So tell us now, let's fast forward to today. Where's your business today? And
so
where are you trying to go?
About a year ago, I hit my Fannie Mae limit, which you can get 10 properties in your name. And what a lot of people like to do is they put all 10 in one spouse's name and other 10 in the other. So you can essentially get 20. But even at that point, at a couple $100 per property, 20 times 200, I mean, that's only $4,000 a month. I mean, that's not much for like a family with kids. And then you kind of cap out and it's not scalable. Like I have like my 10 properties or 11 properties. I mean, I'm getting an eviction probably at least once a year. And at least every few months, there's something semi-major, maybe $1,000 or a couple $1,000 rehab or, some kind of repair that needs to be done. And it's just not scalable. And I feel like these property management companies that I'm working with, they work with a lot of unsophisticated investors, again, the turnkey buyers, and they really gouge us on these like screwy things. And it's like they're charging us like $150 of plumbing labor for like 21 hours. I'm like, are you serious? Like, is this guy going to come in my house, sit on it and like go to sleep, bring his kids and like, then fix the leak, like you gotta be kidding me, right? Right. I mean, so just the level of sophistication and the other people you're playing in the sandbox with, and the scalability, like multifamily for me was the trajectory I need to head since I started so early in this, and I just want to take this like far further, and I kind of like it. So
that's great.
So tell us more about the multifamily.
Yeah, so multifamily, it's totally different. And I rejected the idea a lot because I was like, well, why do I want, all these Fannie Mae loans are supposedly subsidized by the government. Like, why would I not want to do this? But then I stuck it out. And this is something that like a lot of people will reject. Like you look at the lending and it's like, 10-year notes, right? Like, I don't want my note to reset in 10 years, or, I'm used to these 30-year loans, or 30-year amortizations. But then one of the things that really turned me on to multifamily is the Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac loans, subsidized loans. The U.S. government wants us to wants like multifamily, class C, class B, like good stable housing for the general public, because obviously the wealth gap is getting bigger. People can't afford houses. So look where the money is going. The government wants to incentivize investors to go into these properties. And they're doing this with the non-recourse loan. So this is only on properties of loan sizes $1 million or more. I mean, just like how we were following the money on the single family homes on these Fannie Mae, Freddie Mac, single families loans, they're doing it for these bigger stuff. And I'm like, well, why are they doing that, right? Why are they incentivizing like these rich investors who are syndicating deals? But it totally makes sense. And I don't try and explain things. I just follow where the money goes and just do it, right?
Yeah, success breeds success, right? So follow it and let it roll. So that's great. That's great. Yeah. Well, now that you're really pushing on this angle, where are you pushing your business to be within 5 years?
So there's 2 avenues I'm working with now. I have a podcast, and just to try and build awareness and help people get into single family homes.
What's the name of the podcast?
Yeah. And also just continually analyzing deals. I mean, at first I was analyzing probably 40 properties, 50 properties a month. Now, because I had to learn it. Like, I was just analyzing junk from these brokers. But now I'm more down to like 10 a month, a little more selective. But as you guys know, it's a seller's market out there for the Class BC properties that are over 60 units that are stabilized, so I can get that non-recourse debt. I mean, that's like 0 search criteria, right? Like, it gives you some other stuff. And I'm like, no, I don't want that. I want these 3 criteria met. And it's just very difficult to find in the seller's market. And a lot of people are buying properties for $6.5 million, where I underwrite it for 5. And I'm like, how, even at 5.5, how are they even making money? Right? The NOI is negative. And a lot of these properties, I go to the broker, I'm like, hey dude, the debt service coverage ratio is 1.1. How is anybody going to get a loan on this? And he's like, I don't know. Somebody, these other guys bought it. This last one, okay, that's a sign of that. This is just to be patient to hit your criteria. And, ours is the 100% in 5 years. That's what the spreadsheet needs to say for us even to make a move on it.
That's great. Yeah, you have to be conservative. You have to stick to your numbers. And of course, right now, you get into the point where you can be so eager to get a deal, and you can fudge your numbers and to say, well, it's close. So if I just, if I just push it, maybe I won't have so much repairs, or maybe the rents will hit, they'll continue to increase. No, just stick to your numbers, be safe, be conservative, because you're going to buy it, and you can never uncorrect or fix that first bad move of buying it wrong. So that's great points. Thank you for sharing that with everyone.
Yeah. I know a lot of people are, they're keeping the rent increases the same as the last couple of years. Last couple of years, especially in Dallas, for 6%, 5% last 2015, 16. But some people are kind of keeping that same 5% level. And that's no, that's how you get yourself into trouble, right?
Correct. Yeah. Correct. Yeah. And I also see a lot going on out there where rents, they're assuming rents are going to go up, but they're also not anticipating that expenses will keep the trend. And as you know, as your rents go up, you have more going into CapEx, your rents or your expenses are also going to increase. They're almost going to track with you. So yeah, it's great.
Yeah. And that's for a quick tip. That's one thing I key in on is the expenses on the P&L. If it's less than $3,000 a unit, I just throw that thing out. That there's something going on, and you just don't want to touch it. But if you see something like $4,000 or more, now you start digging a little bit more. Now someone's not running this thing as well as they should be.
Yep. I love that. That's great. That's one of the first lines I look at is the per unit expense. So yeah, you and I are seeing eye to eye on that. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah. What's your number that you like to see? Like higher than 4,500 or?
No, honestly, for this point, depends if it's all owners paid property or if your utilities go back. So in the market we're in, it's anywhere from 3,700 to 4,200. And the way I like to underwrite is I'm going to assume that number's never going to get better. That I'm not going to be able to operate it better than that. And if I can find increases or maximize on fixing utilities or just handling the management better, then it's going to be gravy. And that usually helps me on a point. And I'll go off that and go off comparable properties in the area. But when you get into the point, we had one now where the guy's at 2,500 and I'm looking at it and I'm like, well, dude, I see right now you're trailing 12, which is basically scratch paper, but you have no utilities in it. There's no management in it. Maybe you're managing it yourself, but I need to bring in a third party management because I'm 1,000 miles away. So you got to be careful on those lines because just someone gives you a sheet, you have to look into what's actually missing in that point. Because when you get in, put everything in there, guaranteed you're going to be between that 3 and 4,500 mark in the market.
Yeah. Yeah. But hey, man, it's a good property. You don't want to buy it.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, exactly. Right. If you were me, you could step in here day one and increase all the rents $100 a unit. In my
yeah, you don't know what you're doing, man.
Yeah. So
how long you been doing this?
Yep. Well, and we always just say, well, that's great. If you go do it, we'll come back in 3 months and we'll buy it at that price then. So
yeah.
No.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, but these are the people getting in trouble now, right? They're getting like if you think back in 2007, people are pretty much the same shoes as us now. So they bought all these properties, assuming the rents were going to go up, and then these are supposedly the properties that should be leaking out on the market now, right? The 10-year notes are coming due, and they were idiots 10 years ago, but they are only paying the price now.
Yep, exactly right.
You don't want to be that guy.
No, you don't. So that's right. We love it. Stick to your numbers. Well, we have a series of questions we always like to ask at the end of the show. And the first one we usually start off on.
Well, what is an actionable step that you could give to a first-time investor to get into large multifamilies?
I always tell my guys start with single family homes first.
Okay.
Great.
There are 3 things that you need for multifamily. You need the experience, so you'll get that. You need the liquidity, so some people have that, some people don't. You don't want to be making your first mistake with a $2 million plus property.
Yeah, it's true.
That's right.
And then the next is partners, and like quite frankly, who the heck is going to work with you if you have no experience? Yeah, you might have a lot of money, and that might get you into some deals, but you really add no value, right? It's all about adding value in some facet. Nice. And until you've done it, it's just very difficult to show anything to somebody who you actually want to work with. I'm sure you can go on some internet forum and say, hey man, I'm looking for a partner, I'm pretty good.
Exactly. I might have some money in my piggy bank.
Yeah.
No, that's awesome. I love my mantra is adding value. How can I add value to anyone's life? That's better.
So So I would say the action step would be to talk to people like yourself, but always my saying is don't be an asshole. People call and they're like, what markets are you in? Who are you using as your broker? What are you doing this? How much are you, where you're getting your loans from? It's man, calm down. Yeah, quit this question train, right?
Yes.
And these people normally don't go anywhere because that style or that mindset or the lack thereof, they don't attract the right people. They repel them. So always ask how you can add value, like you mentioned.
I love it.
Nice. So another question we like to ask is, do you have a morning routine?
It changes all the time. I used to do a Tabata and meditation. That stopped. Lately I've been doing the miracle morning because when I come back home from work, I'm just pretty tired and I can't really do much and I just procrastinate. So just getting up and the night before writing down what were the frog that I have to do. What are the big things that I need to do? The Gary Keller one thing that if I do that, it propels everything else forward. and then just knocking out first thing in the morning before FOMO sets in and the world wakes up and my inbox gets filled.
Yeah,
crazy, right? Goes crazy.
Yeah, in Hawaii, it's going to be very difficult. It's being like 6 hours behind everybody else. By the time I wake up, like that inbox is just going to be
boom
filled. Yeah.
Well, just so our listeners know, Lane is actually moving back to Hawaii. What, tomorrow?
Yeah, in a few days. Yeah. My
Crazy.
theme song is that I came to the mainland and I bought one place to stay and then I rented out. But yeah, now I'm moving back home for a variety of reasons.
Nice.
That's awesome.
Nice. Yeah. Moving back to Hawaii.
Yeah, you don't need to live where you invest, right?
That's
Nope.
exactly right.
Nope, you do not.
That's why they made airplanes.
So what are some words to live by?
How about we go with the quality of your life is in direct proportion to the amount of uncertainty you can live with.
Love it.
Huh.
So a lot of people are very comfortable in their lives. A lot of people that like listen to my show are like professionals, doctors, lawyers, engineers. They make pretty good salaries, and that's usually the thing. Their downfall is that they're very comfortable, and they can afford the nice cars, and they don't take the leap of faith into buying that first single family home rental. That's kind of my theory on why engineers do this, because we don't make that much money. We can't afford it, Audi. So we're the first to go in terms of that spectrum of professionals.
Well, maybe it's also because your minds are always working on a different level. So you need that extra little you have this awesome, like crazy job that you work a 9 to 5, but then you need like a few more hours on top of that just to like.
Oh yeah.
Dissuade the boredom.
Yeah, or maybe even like, a lot of engineers are sort of on the spectrum of like Asperger's and autism, that like you see the numbers and you're like, okay, let's do it. Like there's no emotion, right? Like there's no second guessing. Like, where do I sign?
That's incredible.
So for our listeners out there who want to find you, what's the best way to do that?
You can go on www.simplepassivecashflow.com. Got a bunch of podcasts there. It's on iTunes, Google Play, Simple Passive Cash Flow. And then I have a book coming out, How to Buy a Turnkey Rental.
Awesome.
Nice.
That I'm probably just going to give out for free, since I just want to get a book with people to review it.
Great.
Well, let us know when that comes out. I'd love to read it. I'd love to review it. That's
it'll be more than one page.
Good.
Turnkey rentals aren't that easy.
Good. Well, congratulations on all your successes. Thank you so much for being on the show, and we look forward to catching you in Hawaii one of these days.
Yes, please.
Yep.
All right. Aloha, brah.
Aloha. Yeah. Thank you so very much for being on our show. This is the REI Foundation podcast with Jason and Peely. Again, aloha, Lane.
Bye.
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 Thanks for tuning into the REI Foundation podcast. Check back next time for more awesome tips and strategies to launch your new you in real estate.